the main message of the book is that like half who you are is like a biological organism. Half of you is to take in information. It's not always to do the right thing. That's only half of you. And so what does it mean if you live your life only being half of what an organism is? And can you if you really understand yourself to be complete when you're in a, I think it gets right back to what Elli was saying, even with the land acknowledgement, like reciprocity, that you're taking in and giving out. It's not just about presenting yourself in a certain way, always having to know the right thing to do. That part of what will make your life fulfilling is to complete the circle, and that means taking information in and letting yourself be changed by the worlds, is part of what it means to be connected and immersed in your life.
That through meditation, through contemplative practices, we can see the same world in a different way. And that's because we are able to shift through our attentional training into recognizing ways in which our minds can slow down, we can step out of a world of concept, and we can embrace experience on a different time scale, moment to moment, present moment, notice our minds wandering, have the capacity to bring our minds back, and to dwell inside experiences that are not preconceived to us and presented to us by habit, by reflex, by past conditioning.
I am delighted to introduce the three humans sitting over here, Mridula, Zindel, and Norm. I have known them across many spaces and times, but first I'm going to do the official thing, which is a little bit of the official bios. So Norm, an associate professor in psychology at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, where he directs the regulatory and affective dynamics laboratory. He studies the cognitive neuroscience of well-being, focusing on mental habits such as how we think about ourselves and interpret our emotions. Together with Professor Zindel Segal, he wrote Better in Every Sense, a book that describes the surprising role of sensation in mental health. On a personal note, I've known Norm for many years and had the joy when I did my PhD of being in a graduate class he was teaching. And I feel like this class was like this wild intersection of like neuroscience, mindfulness, and Star Trek references. And that was a lot of fun. Just a joy. It's really fun when you like meet the human whose work you've enjoyed and find out they're just a delightful actual human. And then moving on to the next human here, I think. Distinguished professor in psychology, funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, and author of over 10 books and 200 scientific publications, including The Mindful Way Through Depression, a patient guide for achieving mood balance in everyday life. Zindel continues to advocate for the relevance of mindfulness-based clinical care in psychiatry and mental health. And again, just another human that when I met was like, it's like my citations are here for my like thesis. So cool. Just like, had a little fangirl moment. And to say, Zindel, when you first meet Zindel, you might think like, very calm, very put together, but like secretly hilarious human. And these two, I met at a coffee shop in Kensington this past summer, and I walk in and they're just like nerding out on the Dharma and life. So thank you both for being like pioneers in this field who are moving the needle forward on the research, and also are just really kind people who, when I spend time with you, I think I'm really glad you exist. And then Mridula, the last human to introduce here, a student of mine about to not be a student, going off into the world, transitioning into graduation, but again, just someone who I've had the pleasure to call a student and also my own teacher. Your care, your kindness, your passion is amazing to be around. And sometimes I call Mridula the queen of questions. So I'm going to leave it to Mridula to take this over, but I'd also just like to say a very proud professor moment. We came over from the ROM, where Mridula has launched this series there called Look Again, and actually did an independent study this past fall where she wrote and designed a meditative experience for museums. So a mind that cares, is creative, and is thinking about how to bring this into everyday life. So maybe before we begin, I'd just like to offer Mridula a round of applause for being brave, going out there and looking at it.
So I'm going to start off by asking you both to maybe give us a download on the story that like led you to that book? So like, what is the research that you got involved in that somehow led you towards better memory sense?
So really happy that people made it out on a Wednesday afternoon to hear us speak and to share some of these ideas. A big impetus for the book and for our working together has been to share ideas, ideas that we've been researching, ideas that we have a conviction about, ideas that span both a clinical psychiatry and a contemplative practice domain. But unfortunately, in some ways, our point of liftoff for writing the book was a sense that our ideas were not succeeding in getting heard by very many people. And so my experience was actually publishing a couple of studies in very high-profile journals, funded by the US government, helping to digitize mindfulness resources for people with mood disorders, and publishing in JAMA Psychiatry, and sort of doing everything that I think as a graduate student I was told were the metrics of success. And then the impact of that was like super, super negligible. Like really, no one gave a shit, really. HMOs, even, we did this study in an HMO in Colorado. And in that HMO, we showed that people who are on a regular treatment pathway for depression, and you just add this digital mindfulness-based cognitive therapy component, their depression scores reduce more quickly than people who are in their usual and fairly robust treatment as usual pathway. And it even saves the HMO money. So you think that that would make a compelling case for people to say, okay, so let's just give people access to this website. It's not expensive. It's a no-brainer. No interest. You're not calm. You're not Headspace. Those are the kind of people that we listen to. And so there was this idea that there's like a disconnect. And it's actually in implementation science, it's called the implementation cliff, where great ideas are born at a university, and then in order to make it to the public, they just fall off a cliff and never heard again. And so it's a real thing. And so, Norm and I were talking, or I'm complaining to Norm, he's listening to me as sort of pseudo-therapist on Monday mornings. And so we thought that, well, what if instead of this formal approach, there are things that mindfulness practices, contemplative practices of many stripes, contain inside them, and there may be other ways of accessing just maybe moments of those practices that could be very valuable as a portal for people to step into this wider world. And then alongside that was this sense that a lot of our brain science findings were actually pointing to different parts of the brain that were involved, and that helping people to access those parts of the brain could be a big part of the story. And so I'm going to let Norman take over that part. Is that okay?
What was the question? Why do we do all this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't you feel like in your own lives, like sometimes like you've discovered something, and if other people found out about it too, it would make a difference, but then you start telling them about it, and then about a sentence in, they're kind of like looking off to the side. And it's like, but then you're spending all your time trying to do that in one way. I think I'm just sort of resonating what you said. I think you said it more eloquently than I will. And it's like, man, we need to be creative. Like at some point we need to put a little art into all this science if we want it to make a difference. And this isn't like, even when you look at the book, I mean, it's a great book, you should get it. But it's just like, you're like, that's just like, it's like you're just starting, it's just like starting to play that game a bit more of like, yeah, we think we actually found something, we think it's replicable, we think other people have access to it if they follow the same kind of techniques, and it might be more accessible than the current way a lot of these knowledge traditions have been disseminated. Not to take anything away from them, because they work extremely well for a lot of people, but not a lot of people want to do formal meditation. So does that mean that those benefits aren't available to them? Or do we think this is really like, these are universal human capacities and there's a whole bunch of ways to get into it, and let's play the game of like how to inspire people enough to take a second or two to try it for themselves? because I fervently believe, maybe with a healthy dose of jadedness, you can't educate people into changing. Like, let me tell you all the things that I know because I'm smarter than you about how you should run your life. Very easy to give advice, very hard to take it, right? So I think it's like a fumbling step in that direction of like, how can we really make a difference and make sure there is some science and evidence behind it, but really to start playing a game of like what would actually make someone think a bit more about how things could be different or better for them, and give them a couple guidelines along the way. And so this is an attempt to do it, and we're still thinking of like, how else can we do that better? How else can we see if we can reach a couple people? Oh, thanks for coming today, by the way.
Can everyone hear at the back? Is that okay? Yeah, okay. Perfect. Awesome.
One button down.
And one button's in the...
Move it.
Yes.
Oh, to move it. Oh. Not to undress.
You didn't know what you were signing up for. Yeah. So what do you think is the primary argument that you're making through the book? Or maybe it's not actually an argument because we just heard that like convincing someone might not actually be the approach. Like what is it that you wanted to communicate to readers, I think, with the book?
So the main message of the book is that like who you are is like a biological organism. Half of you is to take in information. It's not always to do the right thing. That's only half of you. And so what does it mean if you live your life only being half of what an organism is? And can you if you really understand yourself to be complete when you're in I think it gets right back to what Elli was saying, even with the land acknowledgement, like reciprocity, that you're taking in and giving out. It's not just about presenting yourself in a certain way, always having to know the right thing to do. That part of what will make your life fulfilling is to complete the circle. And that means taking information in and letting yourself be changed by the worlds, is part of what it means to be connected and immersed in your life. So we're trying to figure out ways to communicate that idea a whole bunch of different ways so that people can think like, oh wow, am I completing that arc? And if you are already, you're like, I already knew that. But maybe you're like, oh yeah, I've been really trying to always do the right things, and I'm never really receptive to like what it's like to be in the world. I've really put so much of my energy and effort and attention and training into the output side of my brain, and that's literally like only half of my brain. So what does it mean to live a life where what if I only did, have you seen the guy who only exercises one trap? He's like an influencer. It's freaky, right? So, but like what if and so like one side of his neck is like gigantic and the other half is like 11-year-old boy neck, or girl neck, but in his case, it's boy. And so like, what if we're doing that with our brains? Right, is one way to look at it. You probably have a very different way of explaining it.
No, I mean, I think that what Norm's saying is actually backed up by a lot of good brain science and a lot of studies that he's published in good clinical journals. We can talk a little bit about that, but I think there is this sort of central premise in a lot of contemplative practice that through meditation, through contemplative practices, we can see the same world in a different way. And that's because we are able to shift through our attentional training into recognizing ways in which our minds can slow down, we can step out of a world of concept, and we can embrace experience on a different time scale, moment to moment, present moment, notice our minds wandering, have the capacity to bring our minds back, and to dwell inside experiences that are not preconceived to us and presented to us by habit, by reflex, by past conditioning. But I think the message in Sense Foraging is that that type of rigorous training, retreat training, daily practice, formal practice, is also possible for anyone to touch into by shifting attention into the sensory world. The sensory world is right here. It's literally at our fingertips and our fingertips. And so if the shift in attention that allows us to see our minds operate differently is so easy to access, and if continued access of those sensory domains allows the neuroplasticity of our brains to activate sensory regions more easily, over time, that's an important skill that people can learn and bring to themselves.
Can you expand on that more? Why is it important that we put our phones down and pay attention to sensation?
I mean, it's interesting, there is already a bit of a kind of rebellion against screens in Gen Z and other places. But I think from our perspective, the information that you have to work on is often prepackaged for you. Because if you're primarily living in the sort of frontal problem-solving, fixing, outcome-oriented parts of the brain, then you will see things as problems that need to be fixed. You will become a problem that needs to be fixed. And other sorts of dilemmas will arise that are going to be evaluated based on outcomes. Is this helping me? Is this good for me? Am I getting anything out of this? That's all super important. I mean, you want to finish a degree at a university, you have to have that kind of thinking. But it neglects an entirely different domain in which we can experience something that is outcome independent. We just do it for its own intrinsic sake. And we are able to experience our moment-by-moment progression through those kinds of activities in ways that are different than asking ourselves, do I want more of this? Do I need less of it? And by opening up our capacity for sensory engagement, we can sometimes see that, you know, eating an apple can be seen through these two different modes. It gives us this additional gear within which to operate. Not that one is better than the other, it's just that one has been more neglected. And so providing us with that capacity, I think, is enhancing our ability to just experience things more fully.
Yeah, and I think another lens to sort of think about what's at stake with always being on the screens is it's just a question of human freedom. And do you want to only want to be one kind of person in your life? And if you thought that, yeah, of course, like I have a past and that predicts my present and that predicts my future and I'm just along for the ride, that's the kind of person you will be if you're always on screens, because things are fixed for you, they're packaged for you, they're designed to, you know, surprise or amuse you in very predictable, kind of short-lived ways. There's very little uncertainty or ambiguity or challenge. But what if I told you that you could be 1,000, 10,000, a limitless number of beings in this same life? You don't have to wait to be reincarnated, right? You could be a courageous person one day, a timid person another day, somebody who takes risks another day, and you could explore all of that. You are free to do that in theory. You have the potential to do that. And you're shortchanging your potential by training yourself to always just be one way. And so some people would be like, it's okay, it's comfortable, I'm fine, so good, so stay on screens. And if you're like, it kind of feels like there could be more, and I'm curious enough that I'm willing to experience uncertainty, discomfort, fear, negativity. I'm willing to go through some stuff to see what's possible. Then the logical implication of that is you must start living your life slightly differently than trying to make things exactly the same every day. So how does that begin? Well, it begins by not doing the same thing every day. And forces that are like such powerful attractors in your life that they make you conform to the same pattern every single day are just by definition, they're limiting that freedom. So you don't need, like, I'm just trying to argue as a shitty philosopher at this point, right? So where does this freedom occur? It occurs in awareness of ambiguity, right? Awareness of more than one option. Awareness of choice. And so how do you have that awareness? You got to get into situations that are boring and confusing and ambiguous. And then you start being like, what do I do? And then now even if there's two choices, what's the thing I always do? What if I did the other thing? And then, you know, the multiverse opens up for you. Or even in a place where there's enough Marvel movies that, like, most people are like, oh yeah, multiverse, got it, cool. So, which is good, right? A little cultural service there. So I think, you know, that's sort of like what's at stake, right? It's not that going on screens is going to make you punch babies or lapse into depression or all this, like, the doom stuff that they're putting. The real thing that's at stake is, are you going to become more and more determined every day? and not determined like I'm going to do it, but like fatalistically determined, right? And if you're not satisfied with that, you have to think about what can change. And for most people, it's stop doing the most obvious, convenient, rewarding thing.
So I think like that speaks to maybe that intention. So if people are noticing that like they're scrolling and that they every now and then in between funny reels have the thought that like I think there's probably more to life than this, then I think we've got them. And the way that you make it practical, I think, in this book is by offering us this concept of sense foraging, which we heard from Zindel. So I'm wondering if you can unpack that for us a little bit. What is sense foraging, and like how does it maybe relate to meditation and mindfulness? Or do people think it's synonymous? Or yeah.
So I think just linking off what Norm said, so let's say you are someone, you've heard Norman Farb speak here, like, this guy is so inspiring, I want to go out and do this tomorrow. And so, you're on your screen.
What, tomorrow?
Right now, be here now. Okay, so you want to leave the room and be like you, and so you're on your phone and you say, oh no, I remember he said, and the question is, so what do you do? Like, what's the pivot? And if you don't know what the pivot is, then it's just going to be confusing, and like the half-life of his charisma is going to wear off really quickly. But with sense foraging, the answer is sensory world is always there. And so, and this is something that Mridula said actually when we were at the ROM. She quoted a Mary Oliver poem, which is very close to the formal definition, not yet copyrighted, of sense foraging. The lines from the Mary Oliver poem were, pay attention, prepare to be astonished, talk about it. And so the first thing you do is you shift your attention from what you're doing into a willingness to engage with the sensory world and be surprised. So whether you're holding something, whether you're standing somewhere, whether you're sitting somewhere, that's always available to you, and that's the first step. So sense foraging really offers another place to stand in the middle of whatever you're doing that lets you engage with things just a little bit differently, even for a moment or two. And then this willingness to be surprised helps to take outcome out of play, because we're not expecting we're not anticipating what we might want to see. We're allowing ourselves to receive something that may not be expected. And in that sense, we're stepping outside of conceptions and assumptions and expectations. And sometimes interesting things show up. We can be surprised. So it's like activating or pivoting to a place when we remind ourselves that we might want to, that's super, super accessible.
You gave the implied textbook definition, so I don't know if I can do too much better than that, than just saying like any kind of, well, the thing about focusing on intention and not being willing to be surprised is you can guarantee your success, right? And this is we learned from, we've talked about this many times because it's very impactful for both of us, from Sharon Salzberg, how she leads love and kindness practices, is she'll never say, like, feel the love, because then what if you don't, right? So, and then we had a chance to talk to her about it, and they're like, why don't you do that? Like, why don't you promise people they're going to feel love? It's love and kindness, right? Like, sell it. And she's like, well, a lot of people I work with, they won't feel it, and then they failed. So where can you guarantee your success? You can guarantee your success by saying, I'm going to authentically, like without, undercutting myself or anything, I'm really just going to set an intention to be receptive, and that's how I measure my success or not. Did I really set an intention to be receptive to the world? And being receptive to the world means I'm allowing myself to take in information through my senses, and then whatever happens afterwards, it's not my job to control that. And that's not normally, our point is that's not normally how we operate, and to some degree, like from the neuroscience side, that's that capacity to move into that sensory state atrophies, or at least becomes sort of chronically suppressed the more we deal with stress, rejection, isolation, depression, things like that. So we see that it's already like, if you just had to guess what someone's problem is, it's that they're not able to just sit with that intention and be receptive. But if afterwards, like I had a horrible time, I was aware of my colon, my colon was telling me the whole time, it's like, great, but were you successful in setting an intention and then waiting to see what happened, being receptive to see what happened? Like, yeah, it's like, then perfect, you succeeded. Right? And it gets back to how Zindel started his definition is we want to give people something they can just start doing, right? It's not supposed to replace a year on silent retreat or even an 8-week course or something like that. What is the thin edge of the wedge that someone can do to realize that maybe things can be a little different? It doesn't always have to be determined. How do you step into a receptive state when you don't know what that really is? And so the definition for sense foraging is like, do something concrete, turn your attention to something sensory, because that is intrinsically about taking things in, as opposed to having to know and control and respond. Be willing to not know how it's going to turn out, and you did it right if you held the intention for even a couple seconds and then tried to see what was going on, right? And then over time, of course, you can become more comfortable with that and can develop more advanced practices and so on and so on. But the fundamental nature of sense foraging is the classic meditation trio is you set your attention somewhere intentionally, like on purpose, right? And you have an attitude where it's okay, whatever happens to the best of your ability. You're open to whatever happens, right? Intention, attention, attitude.
So we're being invited to forage for sounds around the room, I realize. I planned all of this, 100%. This was in the script. So we heard that meditation may be one modality in which we're invited to sense forage. What are some other modalities that might meet people where they are already, you think?
Yeah, I think, again, the goal is to give people easy wins to begin with, because it could be something totally just weird for them. So pick somewhere where you can enter into an exploratory sensory state, and then we dub those access points. Like, what is an access point that's comfortable for you? And there's some stuff we came up with in the book, but other people have introduced their own, right? So we've heard a lot of people who think they're like knitting is where it is at, right? Like the clack of the needles, you're kind of doing something constructive. I mean, you definitely can succeed or fail in making what you're trying to make, but in the moment, there's like a tactile feedback that it kind of almost demands your attention, but not in a super stressful way. Like, you just kind of have to be in the moment. And for them, that's it, right? So just the catalog of stuff we've brought up the most are like the greatest hits of things people already do that we know are wholesome, right? So going out into nature because it can draw you in, right? And there's a lot of really great research about how it's easier to enter into this receptive, connected, sensory state when things are beautiful around you. So nature or human-made art, right? Regardless of whether that's visual art or auditory, whatever it is, but with that intention set, right? Because you could be in any of these kind of situations and still be thinking about your colon. Just to go back to my old example, right? We talked about interpersonally, like actually trying to be connected. Like right now, it might be creepy, but I am paying attention to how much I'm creeping you out right now, and I'm taking in that information and reveling in it. So really interpersonal connection can be there. It can happen in a therapeutic context, but it can just happen in any place where you feel safe with another person. Like athletic sports where you're trying to do something and you're trying to get that flow of what I'm putting out, but also I'm taking in at the same time. We did a little tip of the hat to psychedelics because it breaks down barriers somewhat involuntarily, though only in hopefully safe legal contexts. And there's probably a whole panoply of other things. But the thing that unites it is you need to have this intention to be shifting into this receptive mode, because you can do all of these activities in a completely automatic, judgmental, deterministic way. So it's the quality of your attitude and intention that you're bringing into these experiences, but finding like a platform that's comfortable for you. Why not start there? Don't start with the thing you hate, right? Is sort of the idea behind finding your access point.
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot of more to add to that, but I would like to ask the audience, so what do you think is the opposite of receptive? What word pops in your mind if you think of the opposite of closed? Rigid?
Resistance in the back.
Resistance, yeah. Stubborn. Predetermined,
So
yeah.
it said pattern also.
Patterns. Yeah. So I think that one of the virtues of what Norman was signaling was that we're already doing lots of activities, eating, walking in nature, exercising, spending time with friends, consuming art and music, but we can do them in a receptive mode. And in some ways, the opposite of a receptive mode is something that is common to what a lot of people have offered, which is that it's an instrumental mode, a productive mode where we're stubborn because we already have a set idea of what this should be like. We're resisting because we already have a set idea of what walking on a nature trail should be like. And that's different from being receptive to what is available for us if we can allow this kind of stimulation to come in. And I think that that's why access points are really important. We're not asking people to jump on a different sort of practice, or we're not asking people to embrace different kinds of behaviors. It's more like you're already doing so much. What happens when you do them from a receptive mode? Oh, and here are some principles that can help you, do it more comfortably to maintain that receptive mode for just a few moments longer.
Can I share my equivalent to knitting? It's grocery shopping. Like, in the next book that you write, if you want me to write a chapter on grocery shopping, I'm so happy to do this because I'm in that receptive state in which I'm like just taking in all this produce. I know for a lot of people it's like another chore to do, but like I could spend hours, and I have spent hours in a grocery store just looking at like labels and produce. It's good. Yeah. So yeah, Zindel, you mentioned like the opposite of being receptive, and I think that reminds me of like the beautiful Buddhist concept of near and far enemies. So to kind of brief anyone if they might not have heard of it, in Buddhism you have like a principle, an idea, and then you are invited to think about its far enemy, which is its opposite, right? It's polar opposite. And then a near enemy is something that looks and like it's almost, you want to say it's the same thing, but it's not. It's actually working to your detriment. So an example might be like the near enemy of love is actually attachment. Like it looks like love, it has these qualities of love, but actually it kind of works to undermine love. So my question to you both is like, what are the near and far enemies of sense foraging?
I mean, just off the top, I think a near enemy of sense foraging is something where people are performing and collecting sense foraging activities, but missing the possibility of doing them in a receptive way. So it becomes another exercise in counting and accumulating. So, going for a walk on a nature trail, tick, did that. Slowing down while I eat my food, tick, did that. And then after a while, the accumulation sort of supersedes the receptivity of the actual experience and what it can show you. And I think that, with Fitbit, with Apple Watches, with, calorie counters, with so many other things, wellness practices like sense foraging can quickly become captured, by that mindset. And then when you're in that mindset, you've sort of, you've lost the receptivity mindset. That would be an example, I think. And potentially a danger, but I don't think sense foraging is like well known enough, popular enough that we really have to worry.
We're working to change that right
now. Yeah.
Yeah, so my partner does this. I don't know if anyone else does. Have you ever been like, I failed today because I didn't hit 10,000 steps or whatever your step goal was? It's useless. Or even worse, like, I forgot my phone, so the steps never happened. The phone doesn't know, so it's like, I gotta walk again.
Yeah.
Just
blood vessels don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So just to riff on that a little bit. Yeah, the near enemy is doing a sensory practice with an outcome focused. So like, I looked around the room for 5 minutes, so why do I still feel lonely? Like it's like I made a contract. I made a contract with you, and you failed me. And that whole time, you're like, where's lonely? Like, am I still lonely? Am I still lonely? So you were foraging for loneliness the entire time. And then the far enemy, I think, which you didn't answer because you were leaving it for me graciously, is just avoidance, right? Avoidance is like everything. It's like behind almost all of our pathologies, right? We avoid sensation so well that we feel nothing and we become depressed. We avoid upsetting situations so much that we don't enter into those situations and we develop an anxiety disorder. And we avoid not having enough pleasure so much that we have addiction, right? And so, that's the most obvious enemy, is you're just constantly turning away from things. But more subtle is you turn towards something, but you're like, gimme, like it's transactional. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm just saying other words for what you already said. Yeah, Slinky agrees.
Okay, now pivot to like storytelling. Who came up with sensory foraging between the two of you? Do you remember? Or can you walk us through the...
When we're together, there is no me and him.
I can feel that, and that's why I feel lonely up here. I am that person who's lonely because of the bromance that's on display over here. Walk us through the conversation. Can you remember where foraging came up, and you're like, that's it?
Really?
I don't know. I think a lot of writing the book was so first of all, I would just say the backdrop is we both are fortunate enough to give a lot of public talks and share ideas. So a sort of narrative does emerge. You just talk, my parents will be like, what are you doing this year in research? I'm like, the same thing I did the past 10 years. This stuff doesn't change very fast. You know what I mean? So there's already kind of these narratives that we've come up with. And I think definitely the idea of sensory inhibition and potentially an imbalance between the front of the brain having to know things and decide things and execute action to the detriment of sensation was something we've been talking about for years. And the thing that's more experimental is so if sensory inhibition is the chronically sort of instantiated habit that's the problem, what is it? What is a verb that means going against the inhibition? And I think we started reading stuff around exploration versus exploitation, it's very, very common in biology. Does the squirrel keep trying to go back to the same tree even though it's going to run out of nuts, or does it risk predation by going and looking at other trees, or it might get beat up by a bigger squirrel or eaten by something? And so then that gets us into exploration and a nature kind of theme. But I'm really just post-hoc piecing together what might have happened. It might just be, I don't think there was a flashbulb moment where an apple fell into the bathtub and we simultaneously said Eureka as Newton and Archimedes, and then we said foraging. That's got to be it. But I don't know if you have a different memory.
So no, it's true. It started with the brain science. We repeatedly found that people who shut off sensation, in other words, deactivated sensory regions of the brain, had a much higher risk of relapse 2 years follow-up from prevention, relapse prevention treatment in depression. And so here was this finding, and it wasn't about reduced activation in the frontal parts of the brain where usually you think that's an important area to try to regulate. And so here was this finding. And so then we ask ourselves, well, if this is the finding, and if the capacity for increasing access to sensory experiences is something that we'd want to train people in, well, if you look at mindfulness meditation, there's a huge impact on somatic and sensory experiences, especially with lots of data showing that increases in interoceptive awareness and the ability to direct attention differently come from mindfulness training. So then that becomes a bit of a project. How can we train people to do this? And is it possible that we can train people to do this without having to use the vehicle of meditation? And so at that time, I think there were a couple of concepts, although he's recently been he's admitted to very disreputable behavior. Redzepi, who was the owner of Noma at the time, the best restaurant in the world, talked about going on the Danish coastline, gathering sea moss and seaweed and foraging for mushrooms. And there were courses in England where you could go with people to forage for mushrooms in the forest and then come back and make a stew and hopefully not poison yourself. But these are things that were already happening in the natural world, and they were being embraced because of the capacity to sort of step outside the lines of normal food or normal kind of cooking fare. And we felt like the concept of foraging was very interesting because it wasn't really as outcome oriented, and allowed for the possibility of exploration. And so we, at some point, married sensory activation with mushroom foraging and came up with sense foraging.
Like, I asked about foraging because, like, that word, for some reason, like, in all the spaces that I share, like, people just, it gets people excited. And one of the people that it got excited was I was speaking to the interim dean of arts and science, who's an evolutionary biologist, and he said, "Are you sure it's a metaphor? There seems to be a good evolutionary argument to make that, like, maybe foraging is supportive of our well-being because we were creatures that were meant to forage all the time for our food." Thoughts on that?
Okay, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. No thoughts.
Let the data speak instead. Yeah.
No, it seems reasonable, but a lot of evolutionary stuff seems reasonable because we can't go back and interview cavemen to see if it's valid.
Yeah, and I think why make up yet another word? Doesn't English have enough words? And so, yeah, something that has a attitude where you're clearly looking for something of value. Because we also found, I find it like very inauthentic as someone who's done like meditation teacher training and courses where they're like, no expectations. And it's like, well, yeah, in the moment you need to be receptive and open, but clearly you have an expectation of benefit, otherwise why would you do this? So foraging kind of captures that. And then to your point, I think that maybe this is something that's already, there's like deep programming. Like we don't have to teach people to do something that's like alien to what it is to be a mammal or a living organism. It's like you already know how to like, all of us have like wandered into the kitchen and we're like, and like you kind of conceptually know what's there, but you don't know what's really there. You're like, I'm gonna open the cupboard. It's like there's already circuits for looking for something good, hoping it's there and not really knowing. And sometimes you close the cupboard and you're like, oh, like, because you don't know exactly, right? So it's like, how do you get people to activate that as almost like a skillful means, like as a practice in a world where everything else is like, I know exactly what I have to do, I just don't have enough time to do it, or like, I can never do it, or something like that. Think about just like, have you ever gone into the kitchen looking for food and that been like a bad experience while you're doing the looking? Like you can be disappointed, but you just come in and you're like, maybe something is yummy. And that's like a circuit that's built into you. Like everyone could, like little kids will do that. Like if my nieces come in, they know that we have carbs for them when they visit. So like my 2-year-old niece will immediately like be looking at me like, where is my tiny muffin or goldfish? Like they just know this is part of the experience. She's just like, what do you have for me? Like you can see it's just wired in. So why don't we just use that wiring, because that wiring puts us into a sensory exploratory state. And then of course as adults, well, maybe we can do that in a more like mature way. But it maybe doesn't have to be, right? Like it can be playful, in all that exploratory, and it's already a circuit, just like, flight or flight is a circuit. We only learn about the heinous circuits often, not the yummy circuits.
And like that makes me think of the sports player. Like for me, it's always a tennis player that I'm thinking of. Like that's maybe foraging for the winner. Like they're not married to the idea that next shot is going to be the winner, but they're open to it. Like maybe this is my chance, and that like receptivity to what's being handed to them. That's activating the same circuit.
Yeah, and I think there you're bringing up a lot more nuance, because like an expert in anything, like a chess player, tennis player, as someone playing music, like who's an expert music player, they know there's a bunch of different ways in, and then they're like probing, what about this way, what about this way, like I hit the ball here, what if I play with this accent on the violin, what if I try this type of defense on a chessboard? And so you can see that with familiarity in a particular context, you actually develop foraging heuristics. It's not just like lose everything, so and just become like a blank slate. You can actually, and this gives us hope as developing this theory, that there probably is a skillfulness that can develop around these practices in the same way that there's a skillfulness in doing your taxes or writing that essay or responding to that email. But it's an exploratory skillfulness. Like, how do I start to map out this space and see what's possible?
Have you noticed any like changes in the way that you engage with your sensations, or like your everyday experiences since writing the book? Like some of the banger ideas that you came up with are like, wow, that was really thought-provoking, and that was like changing my life.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, no, on the changing my life dimension. But like, yes, in certain other ways. Now, if I wake up, I think about focusing on sensations sort of on the lower half of my body and not like on the energy that's going in a racing mind. And I think it's also having more confidence that if I want to pivot into a sensory mode, then that's available to me. I mean, I knew that before because I think that's a big message that meditation teaches you, but in these smaller micro-moment kind of ways, sometimes, we forget or we can become a little bit dependent on a formal meditation configuration in order to feel that and to experience that. And then I think in some of my therapy work, I've become more intrigued and purposeful in asking patients if they're experiencing emotions, where in their bodies they're experiencing it. So that's also helped me tremendously to become a little bit more somatically informed. Modest, but real nonetheless.
Yeah, well, I think like Zindel said, we were already like swimming in the Kool-Aid when we wrote this. So like, these were, it wasn't like, oh, now I'm going to commit myself to somatic exploration. Like, yeah, like that, it was already part of our lives. Yeah. I think it's given us, or at least for me, more, even though you said no, you came up with a bunch of really good examples, by the way. So, yeah, I think for me, like there's been times of adversity where having almost like a formal framework for what I've been doing has been really helpful, like having a set of, like an instruction set when I do get dysregulated, once every couple of years, then it's been really, really useful. So concrete example is I've developed osteoarthritis in my hip. My hip hurts a little bit all the time, and it really, really screwed up my yoga practice because I have like two different bodies now. And I was always like, look, my knees are on the floor, like in whatever it's called, in like butterfly, like, oh, I guess I'm more enlightened than you. And then all of a sudden, like this leg doesn't move at all. And I'd be like, especially a slow, like a yin practice, I would be like raging by the end, like I'd be so angry. And then at some point, like intellectually, it's like, if only you had some sort of skill set that you could use in this kind of situation. Not right away, but like, after like a month or two of like these horrible sessions, you start thinking like, like, and then remembering that there is a recipe now, right? As opposed to just like you have to randomly walk your way into it or be grace is normally how these kind of things would be talked to. You're just going to have this grace moment. It will happen spontaneously. It doesn't have to happen spontaneously. You can be like, why don't you use this as a foraging experience? Why don't you notice what it's like to be in this situation where now things aren't the way you expected, and all you are filled with all I am filled with, see, I'm distancing myself by using you language right now, all I am filled with is awareness of the disconnect, of the discrepancy. Where is there a place where I can come back into the moment in a way that's like meeting it instead of just like rejecting it? And it's one thing to say that in the top 10, just use acceptance, equanimity. It's another thing to say like, pay attention to how your hip feels then, and stop trying to like tell it it's not supposed to be that way. Pay attention to where your leg goes and stop trying to tell yourself it's not supposed to only go that far. It's not supposed to hurt. And that doesn't mean like it didn't, spoiler alert, it didn't magically go back to the way it was. And start realizing like my practice maybe has to change. It has to evolve. And it can only evolve if I'm going to be receptive to the way I am now. And the way I remember to do that is that I have a formal framework where I set it, I notice what something's happening, I set an intention to explore my senses, I let myself be open to what I find, and then I notice how I feel after that. And in a yin practice where you sit in the same excruciating pose for a long time, I might have to use that framework effortfully for most of the practice on a hard day. But I come out really tired, but I'm not angry, you know what I mean? And slowly that evidence accumulates and I stop being disappointed, upset, and surprised by the fact that my hip is the way it is. And it's still an ongoing work, but in the past few years, it's much, there's much less discrepancy because I've started to slowly update to an unpleasant reality. So that's a really concrete example from my own life, and there's other places, but that's enough for that. I'll tell you about other sources of sorrow in another fireside conversation.
Yeah, no, it's finding the yang to his yin practice at the moment. So walk us through process. Like, how does a scientist that's published many, many papers, like I'm sure you could like nerd out about many topics, write a book that's meant for like a general public? What was that process like? So we heard in the intro that Zindel's written 10 books, and for Norm, is this like your first book? It's just your first book. So what was it like having Zindel hold your hand and walk you through it?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had a professional editor who I think helped Dan Harris co-write his book, 10% Happier. We recognized really early on that we would not be, that wouldn't be an easy lift for us to write in a way that would speak to a general public audience. We were just too well trained to write scientific articles. So we would write chapters, we would send them to him, he would edit them by saying, you know, you need to, what was his favorite expression? Show, not tell?
A lot of, or trim the fat.
Trim the fat, show, not tell. Basically telling us, don't describe things, but provide vignettes of people doing things to help get your message across. So that was one thing that was super helpful. And then we, I think, have a very easy way of just having ideas flow back and forth. We're used to meeting fairly regularly to do all kinds of other work. And then the book chapters and all the stuff that needed to be covered would just become part of that process. And it was, yeah, it was productive. We got it done even earlier than I think they expected to receive it.
That's how good we are. Yeah, definitely having someone that you meet with, that you're going to work together, but even just having someone you're going to check in with in general, like as an accountability partner, helps a lot. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of people like the outcome. Like, I want to be an author, I want to be a painter, I want to be a musician, but no one actually wants to do the work. That part is like sometimes boring or frustrating, and it doesn't come out right, and you have to do it again. So learning to do that. Another big thing that we noticed trying to not do so much science writing was like we had already said like, okay, only a third of each chapter will be the actual research, but people will want to know what the studies are. They'll want to know where the evidence came from, right? And then it turned out, no, they don't. And so by the end, I think maybe 10% of each chapter is like the actual science. And they're like, well, no, more concrete anecdotes. Like at the end of this talk, you're going to remember Norm's hip is really screwed up. And like, I don't know all that theory stuff he said, but that dude can't walk. Because it's like a concrete, relatable like anecdote, right? And so we learned that like the first like 45% of the chapter has to be a concrete anecdote. 10%, like little slice, little tiny little bit of protein in the middle to show people that they're getting their nutrition. There's some science there. And then like 45%, like, so what do I do as a practice? And we didn't want to try to create an evidence-based manual, but we really had to shift what we thought people wanted and hear feedback from like the publisher, from our agent, from the editor, from just trying to get family members to even glance at what we're doing, that they're like, this is the place where we lose them, is actually on the science. Yeah. So like a lot of sugar and a tiny little pill of science in the middle.
And do you think there is like an asynchrony between like people picking up a book versus having a conversation with them about the same topic? Like there's something about reading it in a book that like the science you tune out of, or maybe when we sprinkle it in conversation it's more engaging, or is your experience also 10% more than that? Like I've lost them.
Yeah, I think maybe Norm and I have some kind of credibility so that people speaking to us wouldn't expect us to be promoting like conspiracy or really kind of way out theories in this book. So that helps us. And then honestly, I don't think people are really that interested in the science. But the thing is, we are. And without it, we couldn't have written this book. If we just came out of nowhere and started to talk about sense foraging and we didn't have the neuroimaging studies that actually showed that this is what's happening in the brain, then I don't think we could have written it, or we would have been very self-conscious trotting something out there. And it's like, where does this come from? Oh yeah, no, I had a dream last night. And I had the same experience with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, just as an aside. We would teach at Omega. in the US, which was a very big place in the summer where people came to learn different kind of mindfulness-based therapies and other practices. And I was leading with the science, but very quickly, the people who wanted to learn MBCT, they kind of took it for granted, and they didn't, we would start sometimes with a little bit of an intro talk and the science and outcome studies, randomized control trials. Like, by the third time we taught the course, we dropped that. And I don't know. I think people live in different worlds. In our world, science and evidence, and like if we were talking about this for cancer, you'd expect us to say, and this is the evidence. Or surgery, and this is the evidence. But somehow in this area, either it's less important, or there's a sense of, well, we know this stuff already works. It's been around for thousands of years. And so with this hand-holding of the senior editor, his name was Bill, we kind of turned this oil tanker around very slowly and saw that we needed to have a different point of emphasis in the book.
But you're also asking us, like, why don't we just talk to people? Like, why write a book? Like, my dad was like, no one reads books anymore. Why are you doing this? So yeah, like, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to communicate. I think at the end of the day, if you don't make a connection, people are like, you'll remember how you feel when you connect with someone, and that really becomes like the motivation. It's not like, oh, perfect syllogisms. Your logic was like just excellent. I really like the statistical significance values, so now I'm going to change my behavior. Like, it doesn't happen that way. But the prospect of writing a book is just like the scalability. You can get it all down. You can try to like have the whole blueprint there, and then it can just like promulgate, right? There's audiobooks and things like that. Is a book too long a format content to get the idea across to most people these days? Yeah, probably, right? But then you can get excerpts from it. It still gives you like a kind of, a foundation to sort of like, here's what we have so far, and then where are we going to go? I don't know if we should bring this up. We tried making, like, when we were promoting the book, like TikTok videos. So if you ever want to see like the definition of cringe, look up Sense Foraging TikTok, and you'll just be like, these guys are not cool. And so things like that. But it's just a different way of communicating, but also easy come, easy go, right? So someone sits in, even when Jon Kabat-Zinn wrote the principles behind mindfulness-based stress reduction, he said it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard, because then you'll expect like that, like something's supposed to really change, something's supposed to come out of it. So a book isn't as hard, maybe maybe it is, but it's like you put this in, you invest time in it, and what you're really doing is you're exploring the possibility of change. And because it takes a while to get through it, you're in that conversation for longer. 30-second TikTok, you're just like, that was funny, those guys are not cool. And then like you're on to the next 30 seconds, the next 30 seconds, it's 3 a.m. and it's like, it's long gone in the past. So the fact that it is like a slower medium, it's a not double-edged sword, it has benefits and has like detriments, right? And if someone's willing to engage in a longer format, there's a better chance something will stick with them, right? It might take a lot of different media to get across to different people.
Yeah, I think this is like a challenge that a lot of people in well-being like face is, if the way to reach people is through social media, like, do I use that to get the content across, even though like that is part of the problem, maybe like a bulk of the problem. John Green like came up with a video. It's like, am I tobacco? Like, am I the tobacco company? Even though I'm like sharing great ideas, it's through this vehicle that's like damaging to people. So it's like a duality, yeah. And so having a book and having an option, an access point for people in which they can like sustain their attention for a book length argument, I think is good for Jesus, right?
Yeah, like the thing I'm going to be nerding out over the summer is making like a gaming website that are all like sensory games. So it's more like you get to play, it's more interactive, and it's less just like telling. So it's just fun to explore like what are all the different ways you can communicate some of these principles.
So stay tuned for that. To close off, as far as my questions go, I want to do like a rapid fire in which you give me an example of your favorite sensation that fits the following categories. Okay? So.
Is that family feud if I pick up?
Okay, first one is smell, and an example is like smell of coffee or whatever. So smell.
Lately, peppermint.
Peppermint?
Oh yeah. Have you done essential oils? No. Oh, you must. Zindel hates this, by the way.
Bergamot. Yeah.
You know that?
That's cool.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, bergamot.
He's so classy.
Yeah. I wear it every day.
Which is like a pretty big category. So you could pick like a color, like a picture, an image, or a scene.
Marco painting.
Wow. I don't know. I like trees.
Keeping with the bergamot.
Wait, is bergamot a tree thing? I'm not asking.
Tell Norm what bergamot is.
I'm gonna Google it. I know how to research things.
Perfume like a perfume essential oil.
It's a perfume.
Like essential oil.
Does it come from a tree?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay, taste.
Taste. Oh, caramelized cheese. Oh yeah.
Blood orange.
Can't just be orange. Just be blood orange.
Soaked in bergamot.
And to close off, sound.
Mick Taylor's electric guitar, 1969 Rolling Stones.
I like hearing the wind blow. I'm based, Zindel. Okay.
Well, first of all, can we give a round of applause to our speakers?
Good job.